What if the stones we see were never meant to be silent? What if every cliff face, every eroded ridge, every ancient boulder resting in a forgotten valley were not merely the debris of geological time, but the fossilized echoes of an intelligence so old, so profoundly alien, that its final traces harden beneath our feet unnoticed? What if we have mistaken memory for mineral, and remnants of thought for remnants of rock? This question, unsettling and irresistible, opens a doorway into a world
long erased, a world where civilizations may have risen and collapsed millions of years before the first dinosaur walked the earth, leaving behind only the dense, cryptic structures we now call stones. As we drift slowly into this exploration, allow your mind to loosen its definitions. Allow the rigid boundaries between life and geology to soften, just as deep time pressure softened ancient landscapes into the shapes we see today.
Because before there were mammals or forests or the delicate architectures of biological life, Earth belonged to forces far stranger and far more ancient. And in those epochs, where minerals moved like organisms and chemical rivers shaped the fate of continents, intelligence may have emerged in ways utterly different from what we imagine. If consciousness arose not from neurons, but from crystalline networks, not from instincts, but from vibration, then the stones that survived into our era might be the last fragments of a vanished world whose intelligence did not die but fossilized. Today, we classify their remains as basalt, quartz, granite, sandstone. We label them with tidy geological categories. Yet some of these stones hold patterns impossible to ignore. Repeating geometries that mimic circuitry, mineral bands layered with the precision of memory storage, fractals that seem too intentional, too synchronized, too persistent to be meaningless. When we examine such formations closely, something deep in us stirs. A whisper of recognition. A sense that the oldest parts of Earth are not mere remnants of heat and pressure, but archives, silent, compressed archives, of a civilization that once perceived reality through the language of stone. The thought feels forbidden, yet strangely familiar. Perhaps that is why these questions return to us again and again, through myths of stone beings carved by forgotten hands, through legends describing the earth itself as alive, aware, ancient. Perhaps myths are echoes too, echoes of a memory humanity inherited without understanding its origin. And so tonight, as you settle into this documentary and allow your mind to drift across the immense, uncharted distances of deep time, we will examine the possibility that the past is far stranger than we believe, that the stones surrounding us are more than remnants of the planet's formation, that they may be messages, fossilized structures, survivors of an intelligence that rose long before the world became what we know today, not to replace science, but to expand its vision, not to claim certainty, but to open a door into the unknown. Because if the stones are echoes of an ancient, intelligent past, then every valley becomes a library, every canyon a collapsed monument, every mountainside a chronicle of something we have yet to decipher. Let this thought settle. Let it ripple through you like a vibration traveling through crystal, reshaping your perception as we move deeper into the mystery. And before we continue, tell me something. If you've ever looked at a mountain or a strange rock formation and felt that it held a secret, share that in the comments. Speak your curiosity aloud so it can join this journey. And if this exploration resonates with you, subscribe now. Your support helps keep this community of seekers alive, connected, and expanding into questions that most of the world has never dared to ask, questions that lead us deeper into Earth's forgotten past and toward the next revelation that waits just beyond the edge of what we believe. If we are willing to entertain the idea that stones may be echoes of an ancient intelligence, then we must first step into a world that existed before the dinosaurs, before forests, before even the simplest animals began to crawl across the ocean floor. A world almost incomprehensibly old, where Earth resembled a primordial canvas shaped by forces that modern science can describe but not fully imagine. In that age, continents were not the static masses we know today, but drifting fragments merging and tearing apart in cycles that spanned hundreds of millions of years. The atmosphere was shifting, unstable, filled with gases that would be toxic to us. Oceans surged with minerals and heat, glowing with the chemistry of creation. There were no creatures with bones, no creatures with eyes. Yet complexity was emerging, not in the forms we expect, but in chemical structures, mineral clusters, and vast networks of interaction where life and stone were almost indistinguishable. To explore the possibility of prehistoric civilizations before the dinosaurs, we must consider that intelligence does not require soft tissue. It requires complexity, communication, persistence, and the capacity to store and process information. And what material on Earth has proven more capable of storing information than stone? Crystals align themselves into structured lattices. Minerals show repeating patterns. Sediments preserve sequences of environmental change with astonishing fidelity. If nature is capable of such self-organization, what prevents us from considering that far earlier systems may have taken these properties further, evolving toward forms of intelligence that left behind no bones, but left behind structures that still survive, hiding in plain sight? When we look at the rock record from deep time, we find patterns that challenge explanation. Layered bands arranged with clock-like precision, fractals that mirror mathematical designs, structures resembling networks, branching like neural circuitry or root systems, yet predating both by hundreds of millions of years. These patterns are typically explained as products of chemistry, pressure, and temperature, and surely many are. But what if some are the remnants of something else? Something that lived, interacted, and adapted not through cells, but through the slow, rhythmic movement of minerals responding to environmental cues. If ancient Earth fostered such systems, they would have perceived time differently. They would not think in moments, but in cycles, not in impulses, but in shifts of heat, pressure, and energy. Their communication might have been vibrations traveling through stone. Their memory might have accumulated as layers within mineral frameworks. Their evolution might have been driven by geological rhythms rather than biological competition. Such a civilization would be almost invisible to us now because its remains would be inseparable from the crust itself. We would not find tools. Its tools would be environmental modifications. We would not find ruins. Its ruins would be mineral patterns. We would not find fossils. Its fossilized presence would look like stone formations we classify as natural, simply because they do not resemble anything alive today. Consider stromatolites, layered structures created by microbial communities billions of years ago. For centuries, scientists believed they were purely geological formations because they looked too structured, too static, too mineral. Only when the patterns were examined more closely did researchers realize they were once alive. Now imagine structures far older, far more complex, but equally disguised by time. Structures we have not recognized because we do not expect intelligence at such scales or within such materials. Even the oldest rocks on Earth, the Jack Hill zircons, contain isotopic signatures hinting at processes that resemble environmental regulation, patterns that could be natural or could be remnants of ancient systems guiding their own stability. And scattered across ancient terrains, we find mineral veins forming grids, fractals, and repeating circuits that stretch for kilometers. If we allow ourselves to imagine they could be technological or informational systems, the landscape begins to shift before our eyes. Suddenly, Earth no longer appears as a barren world waiting for life to begin, but as a world alive with strange, mineral-based intelligence exploring possibilities long before biology learned to build muscle and bone. And if such civilizations ever existed, their collapse would not produce ruins, but transformations. Their memory would condense into rock. Their structures would be warped by heat, crushed by tectonics, buried beneath continents. What survived would be fragments, patterns lacking context, echoes without voices, traces awaiting interpretation. And scattered among these traces are anomalies geologists still debate. Perfectly spherical stones appearing in layers far too ancient for biological action. Repeating hexagonal chambers carved into basaltic formations. Mineral inclusions that resemble precise arrangements rather than random deposits. They are cataloged, explained, re-explained, debated, and eventually filed away as curiosities. Yet taken together, when viewed through the possibility of an ancient mineral civilization, they begin to align into a narrative that whispers through deep time. a narrative suggesting that Earth may have hosted intelligence not once but many times, each erased by the unrelenting churn of geological forces, each leaving faint signatures that could be misread as mere coincidence. And as we examine this world before the world we know, a question emerges. If intelligence once existed in the stone, how would it recognize itself, preserve itself, or attempt to ensure its continuity across millions of years? To follow that question deeper, we must enter the realm of minerals that behave like memory systems, crystals that store information, and structures formed so precisely that they compel us to consider whether the Earth itself might have been shaped by patterns that, if we are to imagine a world where intelligence may have once emerged from stone itself, then we must turn our attention to the strange and often overlooked behaviors of minerals when they interact with energy, heat, vibration, and time. Because minerals are not static. They move, shift, resonate, align, fracture, store signals, release pulses, and respond to environmental conditions with a complexity that goes far beyond what we typically associate with inert matter. When we examine the mineral world closely, especially under the lens of deep time dynamics, we find phenomena that mimic the foundational building blocks of cognition: pattern formation, information retention, electrical responsiveness, chemical signaling, and structural adaptation. These are not metaphors. These are measurable, observable properties of the mineral kingdom. And if nature already allows minerals to behave in ways reminiscent of primitive processing or memory, then the possibility that intelligence emerged through mineral networks becomes less speculative and more inevitable. In modern laboratories, researchers have discovered that certain crystals can store data, respond to electromagnetic waves, and change structure in response to external stimuli. Quartz vibrates with a precision that makes our clocks possible. Magnetite allows bacteria to navigate using Earth's magnetic field. Silica can form optical pathways that behave like microscopic communication channels. Even salt, under the right conditions, can develop branching patterns that resemble decision trees. These behaviors are usually described in technical terms, without acknowledging how close they come to the properties of living systems. But what happens when we scale these effects across continents, across millions of years, across environmental conditions we can barely comprehend? Early Earth was rich with energy, lightning storms more violent than anything in the modern world, volcanic systems generating massive electrical fields, tidal forces from a closer moon, and constant bombardment from cosmic particles. These energies interacted with mineral oceans, crystalline sediments, and metal-rich crusts, creating conditions that could stimulate self-organizing structures. And self-organization is the foundation of emergence. Emergence is the foundation of intelligence. In the deep oceans of today, we see mineral chimneys forming ecosystems based on chemical gradients rather than sunlight. These chimneys grow, split, merge, and change structure depending on environmental input. It is not difficult to imagine similar structures developing into something more intricate in the deep past. When minerals conduct electricity, they form pathways. When pathways repeat, they form networks. When networks persist, they form feedback loops. When feedback loops stabilize, they begin to behave like systems. And systems, under the right pressures, can drift towards something resembling thought. But thought from the perspective of minerals would be fundamentally alien to us. It would not occur in seconds, but in centuries. It would not rely on neurons, but on shifts in temperature, vibration, and electrical flow. It would not express itself through motion or language, but through pattern modification and environmental influence. A stone-based intelligence would think in transformations, in crystallization, in resonance, in pressure differentials. It would process the world not through biological senses, but through seismic waves and chemical gradients. And when such an intelligence attempted to communicate, it would not leave behind symbols but structures, patterns we now misinterpret as purely geological. Consider the rhythmic banding of ancient rocks. Some sequences demonstrate such persistent periodicity that they resemble recorded cycles. Not cycles of tides or climate, but cycles of internal adjustment. Consider mineral clusters that form branching systems. Some appear too optimized, too efficient to be products of random deposition. Consider metallic veins that create intersecting grids within bedrock, grids that map regions in ways that look almost architectural. These formations are typically dismissed as accidents of nature or the result of pressure and heat, yet their precision remains suspiciously consistent. Their geometry often extends for kilometers. Their formation sometimes contradicts known geological pathways. And beneath the surface, we find evidence of minerals that grew together in ways suggesting cooperative behavior rather than individual crystallization. These are not the signatures of mindless matter. They are the fingerprints of systems capable of storing information through structure. And if we step back and observe the mineral world from the perspective of patterns rather than objects, a new landscape emerges. It is a landscape filled with networks that resemble circuitry, pathways that resemble communication channels, and formations that resemble memory storage. It is a world that could have hosted intelligence not built from cells but from structure. If such intelligence ever arose, it would have interacted with Earth in ways that shaped the planet subtly but profoundly. It could redirect mineral flows, influence erosion patterns, alter the formation of certain strata, or create zones of stability or instability according to its internal logic. And if these influences fossilized, they would appear to us as anomalies, as curiosities, as strange alignments we cannot fully explain. They might also appear as sudden bursts of complexity in the geological record, moments where mineral organization seems to increase dramatically without an apparent environmental cause. These moments could be the echoes of mineral systems reaching new thresholds, new forms of coordination, new expressions of thought. And if some stones today are the last remnants of those systems, then examining them becomes a way of listening to a civilization that once thought in shapes, pulses, and slow, deliberate transformations. But to truly understand how such intelligence might have survived, collapsed, or preserved itself, we must turn our attention to another enigma: the fossils in Earth's oldest rocks that do not resemble life as we know it. Fossils with patterns too complex for natural chance and too structured for biological origins. Fossils that may not be fossils at all, but the final imprints of systems trying to. If the mineral world once carried intelligence, then the next place we must look for traces of its existence is in the fossil record. Not the fossils that fill museums and science textbooks, but the oldest, strangest, least understood fossils of all. The ones that do not resemble organisms, bones, shells, or anything biological in the way we define biology. These enigmatic structures, preserved in stone older than complex life itself, have puzzled researchers for decades. Some appear as symmetrical impressions with perfect radial balance. Others take the form of coils, spirals, or fractal branching patterns that defy simple explanations. A few resemble structured discs with internal segments like gears pressed into ancient mud. And scattered across the globe, in strata predating the Cambrian explosion, are fossils whose very shapes challenge the notion that early life was simple. These forms, too organized, too balanced, too architectural, do not fit neatly into the categories of algae, bacteria, or microbial mats. They seem to occupy a space between life and architecture, between natural formation and intentional pattern. Scientists classify many of them as problematic fossils. The term itself reveals uncertainty. Not wrong, not impossible, simply not understood. Some Ediacaran impressions show elegant repeating motifs that look like the blueprint of something designed. Others possess radial symmetry more perfect than modern biological organisms. Still others contain internal channels arranged with the precision of structural engineering rather than evolutionary accident. When these forms are examined through microscopes, the complexity intensifies. Micro-layering reveals consistent spacing. Thermal analysis shows they resisted heat in ways few biological materials can. Spectroscopy reveals mineral compositions suggesting that these forms were either reinforced by or entirely composed of crystalline structures. And yet, they appear in layers associated with ancient life, hinting that they were not foreign to early ecosystems. This raises an unsettling question. What if these problematic fossils are not the remains of biological creatures, but the fossilized traces of mineral-based intelligence expressing itself through structure? A civilization rooted in stone would create patterns that blur the line between organism and artifact. Its bodies might resemble architecture. Its communication systems might fossilize into fractal curves. Its growth patterns might leave behind impressions that mimic engineered designs. But because we view most of Earth's history through a biological lens, we categorize anything not fitting modern biology as anomalous or misunderstood. Consider the rangeomorphs, large fractal leaf-like organisms that lived more than 550 million years ago. Their structures are so mathematically precise that researchers once proposed they might represent natural fractal algorithms spontaneously arising in deep oceans. But what if these shapes were not just passive organisms, but elements of a distributed system, extensions of a networked intelligence experimenting with form? Some rangeomorph fossils show branching patterns identical to electrical diffusion networks. Others appear to have grown in layered sequences, adjusting angle and size in response to the environment, behavior that could align with environmental sensing. Still others cluster in arrangements that look less like random placement and more like deliberate organization. Another example lies in the so-called elusive disks found in Precambrian strata. These round impressions often have concentric ridges, segmented interiors, or radial grooves. Some researchers suspect they were organisms. Others believe they were microbial colonies. But under a different lens, they resemble ancient components, perhaps memory nodes, resonance plates, or elemental structures that once housed or conducted information. Then there are the spiral fossils, perfect logarithmic spirals etched into stone older than any animal. Spirals can form naturally through fluid dynamics, but some of these fossils are too precise and too consistent across large regions to be explained by simple flow patterns. They resemble growth influenced by internal rules, internal logic, or internal purpose. And sprinkled throughout ancient rock layers are metallic inclusions arranged in straight lines or repeating geometric patterns. They could be natural. But some behave like conductors embedded within insulating minerals. Some resemble pathways. Some form angles too consistent to be random. These anomalies accumulate across continents. One alone proves little. Together, they form a mosaic of hints. But even if these fossils are remnants of ancient systems, the question remains: why do they appear at certain times and disappear completely at others? The answer may lie in the turbulent nature of early Earth. Ecosystems were unstable. Environmental pressures shifted violently. Oceans experienced periodic chemical surges. Oxygen was scarce, then abundant, then scarce again. Any mineral-based intelligence would face cycles of growth and collapse just as biological life does, but its cycles would align with geological rhythms rather than evolutionary ones. When conditions became too hostile, structures might fracture. When resources changed, networks might dissolve. And when the Earth underwent large transitions, entire systems might crumble, leaving behind only fragments of the patterns they once maintained. In this sense, the fossil record becomes not a chronicle of biological evolution, but a palimpsest of multiple worlds: biological, chemical, mineral, each rising and falling in the same physical canvas. And hidden within this record is a deeper question. If these enigmatic fossils are remnants of ancient intelligence, then their disappearance does not mark the end of that intelligence, but the beginning of its transformation. Because when a system collapses, the information it once held does not vanish. It becomes diffused into the environment, changing how new systems emerge, shaping future forms, influencing the evolution of complexity itself. Which leads us to the next mystery. If the fossils of these ancient structures hint at sophisticated patterns, then there must have been something even more extraordinary guiding those patterns, something capable of spreading across vast regions of the planet, communicating through geological materials, and leaving behind an imprint so subtle that only now are we beginning to. If the enigmatic fossils scattered across Earth's oldest strata are merely fragments of a much larger network, then the true scale of prehistoric intelligence must be sought not in isolated specimens, but in the architecture of the planet itself. Because what emerges from a closer examination of deep-time geology is a strange and persistent pattern. Large-scale formations arranged with a coherence that seems to exceed even the capabilities of natural processes. These formations, bands stretching across mountain ranges, mineral grids embedded within bedrock, repeating geometric structures carved into cliff faces, may hold the key to understanding a civilization that never built cities, never forged tools, and never left behind monuments in the way humans do, yet still altered the Earth through mechanisms woven into the very material of the crust. When researchers study ancient terrain, they often encounter rhythmic layering that reflects long-term cycles. Some are attributed to climate variations, tidal influences, or chemical oscillations, but others exhibit a precision that challenges these explanations. In certain regions, mineral bands repeat in perfect intervals across hundreds of meters, their spacing so uniform that they resemble recorded sequences, like geological inscriptions made by some unknown process. These structures seem to preserve information in their arrangement, as if the Earth itself once acted as a memory system. And when observed through the lens of deep-time intelligence, it becomes plausible to imagine that these bands are remnants of large-scale frameworks, perhaps part of a prehistoric system designed to regulate environmental conditions, record planetary states, or distribute energy across mineral pathways. There are also structures known as polygonal patterns, vast fields of hexagons etched into ancient landscapes. Some form through cooling basalt, but others appear in sedimentary layers far too old and too chemically inconsistent for such a process. Their geometry is too regular, too stable, too expansive. They resemble the efficiency-driven patterns created by collective systems, like honeycomb structures or crystalline networks optimized for resource flow. If ancient intelligence operated through distributed mineral forms, then hexagonal grids could be remnants of communication surfaces or structural frameworks, not so different from how biological organisms today form networks optimized for survival. Even more perplexing are the colossal mineral folds found in some of Earth's earliest continental fragments. Geologists explain these folds through tectonic pressure, but certain formations bend with a smoothness and symmetry that resist this explanation. Instead of random deformation, they curve like engineered arches, maintaining consistent ratios across thousands of meters. These features seem to obey internal logic rather than external force. They look like architecture, not in the human sense of walls and buildings, but in the deeper sense of structure created with purpose. What if these formations were once components of ancient systems, perhaps used to guide the flow of minerals or stabilize regions prone to geological instability? If prehistoric intelligence expressed itself through environmental manipulation, then adjusting the architecture of the crust would have been an efficient means of survival. But the most compelling evidence comes from regions where geometric formations intersect with each other. In such sites, angled mineral veins cross in patterns resembling circuits, with nodes appearing at consistent intervals. Some veins are composed of materials that conduct electricity better than their surrounding bedrock. Others form precise right angles inexplicable by known natural mechanisms. These intersections look like connection points, places where ancient systems may have concentrated energy, processed signals, or harnessed environmental gradients. If intelligence emerged in stone, then this is where it might have spoken. Modern science hesitates to assign meaning to these structures, of course. The risk of overinterpretation is always present. But when numerous anomalies converge, precision, repetition, alignment, energy-responsive materials, the possibility of intentionality becomes difficult to ignore. And if such architecture ever existed, it would not remain static. Over millions of years, tectonic forces would distort it. Erosion would obscure it. Heat would metamorphose it. What remains today would be fragments, relics stripped of context, but still carrying hints of a once coherent system. We must also consider the ways early Earth's environment could have influenced or even shaped such intelligence. The planet was more reactive then. Its magnetic field fluctuated more intensely. Its geothermal systems pulsed with greater energy. Its oceans teemed with minerals that facilitated conductivity. This was a world where stone behaved differently, where the boundaries between matter and process were more fluid. A civilization emerging within such conditions would naturally think through the medium of Earth's architecture, using mineral frameworks as both its body and its tool. If such intelligence sought to preserve knowledge, it would embed it in large-scale structures that could withstand geological forces, structures that today appear as mountains, plateaus, and crystalline deposits with unnerving precision. And if it sought to communicate across distances, it would use gradients, resonance, or mineral conductivity to propagate signals across vast regions. These signals might have left behind subtle imprints, chemical anomalies, aligned crystals, or unusual mineral distributions that modern science interprets as natural irregularities. Yet, if interpreted differently, they could form the remnants of a prehistoric communication network, a web of information embedded in stone. But architecture implies purpose, and purpose implies survival. This raises a deeper question. What pressures could have driven a stone-based intelligence to alter the crust of the Earth so extensively? Perhaps environmental instability forced it to create structures for regulation. Perhaps communication across distances required stable networks. Or perhaps the very act of existing at geological scales necessitated shaping the world as part of its cognition. Whatever the reason, the result would be a planet subtly sculpted by intelligence, an intelligence long vanished, but still traceable in the deepest layers of rock. And if these traces exist, then they must lead us to an even more profound mystery. Because architecture is only the outer expression of thought. Beneath architecture lies memory, and beneath memory lies the question of how a civilization without biology, without organs, without technology in the human sense, could encode, preserve, and transmit the records of its existence. To pursue this question, we must examine the mineral formations that behave not like structures, but like if the architecture embedded in Earth's ancient crust hints at an intelligence that once expressed itself through structure. Then the next step is to explore the possibility that this intelligence possessed not only form but memory. Because architecture alone does not imply civilization. What truly defines a civilization is continuity, the ability to preserve information across generations, cycles, and catastrophes. In biological systems, memory is stored through DNA and neural connections. But for a mineral-based intelligence, memory would be woven into the environment itself. Minerals are capable of storing information in their atomic arrangement, their crystal orientation, and their layered composition. Over long periods, external forces such as heat, vibration, and chemical gradients can modify these structures in ways that behave like writing without symbols, but with patterns carrying meaning. It is not difficult to imagine a prehistoric intelligence encoding memory in shifts within mineral bands or altering the alignment of crystalline lattices to record environmental data. Some minerals today exhibit piezoelectric properties, meaning they generate electric charge when stressed. If ancient systems used these materials, perhaps they created feedback loops that recorded shifts in pressure or vibration across large regions, embedding records of planetary states into the stable medium of stone. Observed today, these imprints would appear as subtle distortions in otherwise uniform crystalline frameworks, patterns small enough to escape notice unless we knew to search for them. Even more intriguing is the possibility that ancient intelligence used chemical gradients to store and retrieve information. In layered sedimentary rocks, chemical signatures often reveal sudden changes in the environment, but some sequences repeat in ways that do not correspond to known natural cycles. These repetitions resemble code, layers arranged like pages in a book, each carrying a message from an era so distant that the continents themselves have forgotten their shape. If such a system existed, its memory would not be fragile. It would not decay easily. It would not depend on organs, writing, or biological continuity. It would persist through time, surviving even mass extinctions, slowly eroded but never completely erased. A mineral-based civilization could, in theory, record its entire history within the very stone it inhabited. And because stone endures, some fragments of that memory could still surround us today. But memory alone is not enough. A civilization must not only store information but also access it. For mineral intelligence, memory retrieval might have occurred through resonance. When vibrations travel through a crystal, they interact with its structure in ways that can reveal internal patterns, just as seismic waves reveal the interior of the Earth. Perhaps ancient networks used resonance to activate certain patterns, retrieving information by generating specific frequencies. To us, these patterns remain silent, fossilized in the stone. But to beings capable of perceiving through vibration, they could have been as readable as text. Modern researchers are beginning to uncover phenomena that support this idea. Some ancient rock formations produce tones when struck, tones that change depending on where the rock is touched, hinting at internal structures designed to respond to vibration. Others contain repeating layers that produce unique frequency signatures when tested with acoustic instruments. These formations have been categorized as geological oddities, but what if they are remnants of ancient storage devices? repositories of prehistoric knowledge preserved in stone. And if these memory systems once existed, they could have communicated across vast regions. Vibrational patterns could propagate through the crust. Chemical signals could spread through underground networks. Electrical pulses could travel along mineral veins. Such systems could form a planet-scale intelligence, distributing information across continents like a neural network spanning the body of Earth itself. This raises another profound possibility, that prehistoric civilizations were not separate entities living on the Earth, but emergent systems living within the Earth. Their cognition would not be local, but distributed. Their identity would not be individual, but collective. Their survival would depend on maintaining coherence across networks as fragile and powerful as the world's earliest ecosystems. But even the most stable networks can collapse. And when they do, their memory fragments scatter across geological layers, leaving behind only cryptic patterns waiting for new life to interpret them. It is here that we must consider the most provocative idea. What if humanity's fascination with patterns, our hunger for meaning, our instinctive recognition of geometry, our ability to detect structure within chaos, arises partly because the world we evolved in is filled with the remnants of ancient memory? What if our neurological architecture reflects, in subtle ways, the patterns embedded in stone long before biology took its first steps? What if we evolved not in a vacuum, but in a landscape, already shaped by intelligence, absorbing echoes of prehistoric knowledge without ever understanding their origin? If there is truth in this, then our exploration is not merely scientific or speculative, it is personal. Somewhere in our perception, in the deep architecture of intuition, we may already be responding to signals millions of years old. And if this journey has sparked something inside you, if you feel the pull of this forgotten world, the sense that Earth has been holding a memory we are only beginning to uncover, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support strengthens this community of seekers, helping us continue to follow the hidden threads weaving through the fabric of deep time, guiding us toward questions most people never dare to ask. Because the deeper we follow these traces of memory, the more we are drawn toward the mechanisms that could have allowed ancient intelligence not only to store information, but to send it, transmit it, and perhaps even project it through the very materials that, if a prehistoric intelligence stored memory within stone, then the next layer of its existence must have involved transmission, the ability to move information across distances, across environments, or even across ages.
Because memory without communication is isolation, and no intelligence can remain coherent if it cannot transmit signals between its components. A mineral-based civilization would require transmission methods fundamentally different from those used by biological organisms. It would not rely on speech or chemicals released from cells. Instead, it would harness the very properties of the Earth: vibration, pressure, electric charge, resonance, and the movement of particles through crystalline frameworks. When we examine some of the oldest rock formations with this perspective, we begin to notice that many geological anomalies resemble the paths and conduits of a communication system. Thin mineral veins stretch for kilometers, perfectly aligned with fault lines or magnetic gradients. These veins often consist of materials that conduct electricity or respond to pressure changes. Scientists normally explain them as products of fluid infiltration, tectonic stress, or hydrothermal activity. But what if they once served as pathways, ancient conduits through which information traveled? The Earth is full of natural frequencies. Every rock vibrates in response to seismic activity. If prehistoric intelligence operated within this medium, it could have manipulated these vibrations to send signals. Certain frequencies travel farther than others. Certain minerals amplify or dampen waves. A network of conductive veins embedded in the crust could act like the circuitry of a vast, slow-moving consciousness, transmitting information through resonance rather than through biological synapses. And if these conduits transmitted information, they might have left behind subtle structural signatures, variations in crystal alignment, regions where minerals show signs of repeated stress cycles, or veins that contain unnatural mixtures of elements that indicate intentional selection. Some ancient mineral formations show precisely such features. In certain Precambrian rocks,
Researchers have identified repeated deformation patterns that occur too rhythmically to be the result of random tectonic forces. These patterns behave like the geological equivalent of a signal traveling through a medium. They suggest pulses of pressure or vibration moving along a defined pathway, shifting the internal structure of the rock with each pass. Over millions of years, these signals would fossilize into permanent scars, preserving the rhythm of an intelligence that no longer survives. Transmission could also occur through chemical channels. When chemicals diffuse through porous rock, they create gradients that can carry encoded information, much like chemical signals in modern biological systems. If ancient systems used such gradients, they would leave behind mineral signatures that show repeated cycles of chemical enrichment and depletion in organized patterns. And indeed, in some ancient formations, chemical layering does not align with environmental cycles or known geological processes. Instead, the layers appear to be arranged according to patterns that mimic waveforms, oscillating sequences that could record the propagation of chemical pulses used to transmit information. Electric charge offers another pathway. Piezoelectric minerals generate electric fields when stressed. These fields interact with surrounding materials, creating patterns that could carry signals across large distances. In the deep past, when Earth's crust was thinner and more active, seismic pressure could have produced pulses capable of traveling through networks of piezoelectric minerals, transmitting encoded information across regions far larger than any biological organism could inhabit. Today, such pulses would appear as anomalies in the magnetic or electrical properties of ancient rock. Some geologists have discovered regions where the magnetic orientation of minerals shifts abruptly in straight lines or geometric curves, as though responding to organized electric fields. These lines do not correspond to known geomagnetic events. They seem to reflect local phenomena that may have once been directional signals. Even light could have played a role. Certain minerals allow photons to pass through their structures along defined pathways. Others reflect or refract light in highly specific angles. In a world dominated by mineral intelligence, these optical properties could serve as channels for communication, transmitting information through pulses of light traveling through clear or semi-translucent materials. Fossilized crystal structures sometimes show modifications resembling optical pathways, straight, narrow channels etched into mineral matrices. These channels lack the branching or irregular patterns typical of natural cracks. Instead, they behave like conduits designed for the controlled movement of energy. But perhaps the most fascinating form of prehistoric transmission lies in resonance, the ability of objects to vibrate at specific frequencies. When vibrations match the natural frequency of a structure, they cause amplification. This effect could allow signals to travel across immense distances with minimal energy. Ancient intelligence could have used resonance to synchronize distant components of its network, creating a planetary-scale system capable of coherent thought. Evidence of such resonance may still lie in stone. Some formations produce tones when struck, and these tones vary according to the structure's internal geometry. Ancient humans discovered some of these singing stones, using them in rituals or construction, unaware that they might be interacting with echoes of a much older system. But imagine a prehistoric civilization whose senses were tuned to acoustic and vibrational frequencies. To them, the earth would have been a living symphony, with every stone carrying a fragment of meaning, every vibration a whisper of information. Transmission through resonance could also explain why some ancient geological structures appear aligned across continents. These alignments are typically attributed to tectonic processes, but some maintain angles and spacing too precise for random drift. They resemble nodes in a vast grid, a grid that might once have balanced itself through the subtle dance of vibrational exchange. And if such a network ever existed, then its collapse would have produced geological chaos, distortions, fractures, anomalies, layers out of sequence. Many of these features exist, scattered across deep time strata, unexplained oddities that geologists accept as natural but quietly recognize as unusual. They may be scars left from a communication system ceasing to function, a network losing coherence as its frequencies faded into silence. Yet even silence leaves traces. When a system stops transmitting, its pathways fossilize, its channels become mineral veins, its resonance chambers become caverns or folded rock, its memory nodes become anomalous inclusions, and its final signals may survive as faint variations in mineral density, like the fading echo of a message broadcast millions of years before life learned to crawl. Which leads us deeper into the next question. If prehistoric intelligence once transmitted information through Earth's materials, then the nature of its awareness must have been unlike anything we recognize. Its perception tied to geological rhythms, its consciousness emerging from. If prehistoric intelligence once transmitted information through the Earth itself, then its consciousness must have been nothing like our own. Our awareness arises from neurons firing in milliseconds, signals darting across synapses in patterns that construct sensations, thoughts, memories, and decisions. But in a world where intelligence was embedded in stone, consciousness would have emerged not from rapid electrical bursts, but from geological rhythms, slow, powerful, steady. Such an intelligence would not perceive time as we do. It would not divide experience into moments or days. It would perceive existence through cycles, pressure shifts, temperature gradients, and vibrational flows. A single thought might take centuries to form, yet it would be deeper, more integrated, more expansive than any biological impulse. To understand such consciousness, we must challenge our assumptions about what it means to be aware. Modern research already challenges the notion that consciousness requires a brain. Fungal networks distribute decision-making across kilometers. Slime molds solve complex problems without any neurons. Coral reefs respond to environmental stimuli as unified systems. Trees communicate through chemical exchanges in the soil. These systems exhibit forms of awareness that defy our categories. Now imagine that same principle amplified across entire geological regions, embedded in materials far more stable than organic tissue. An intelligence of stone would not think in images or words. It would think in patterns, in geometries, in shifts of alignment within crystals, in alterations of mineral densities. Its emotions, if such a concept applies, might appear as changes in resonance, sympathetic vibrations that ripple across networks. Its memories would manifest as modifications to structure. Its communication would echo through the crust like faint seismic whispers, and its perception would extend across vast distances through the continuity of rock, allowing it to sense changes in the planet not as isolated events, but as integrated signals in a single planet-sized body. Such a consciousness would be deeply connected to the Earth. Every tectonic shift, every volcanic eruption, every shift in magnetic field would shape its awareness. It might perceive the birth of mountains as emotions, the rise of oceans as transitions, the drift of continents as slow evolution. Its existence would not be separate from the planet. It would be the planet, or at least a complex system living within it. And if such intelligence existed, then its collapse would be catastrophic. When biological civilizations fall, they leave ruins. When a mineral intelligence collapses, the collapse becomes part of the Earth itself. Its awareness might fragment into isolated pockets buried beneath continents. Its communication pathways might shatter into disconnected veins. Its memory systems might dissolve or metamorphose, fossilizing into patterns we now see as strange geological anomalies. This could explain why certain regions of ancient rock show signs of abrupt structural instability, as though a system once coherent had suddenly lost its internal balance. It could also explain why certain fossil-like formations appear to belong to networks rather than organisms, as if they were vestiges of collective structures rather than individual entities. But a collapse does not necessarily mean an ending. When a tree falls in a forest, its nutrients feed new growth. When coral dies, its structure becomes the foundation for future reefs. When civilizations disappear, their knowledge lingers in myths, languages, and artifacts. The same may be true for prehistoric mineral intelligence. Even if its consciousness dissolved, its influence might persist. Patterns embedded in the environment could shape the evolution of biological systems, guiding life along certain pathways without conscious intention. Chemical gradients shaped by ancient systems might affect where certain forms of life could thrive, steering the development of ecosystems. Mineral structures optimized by prehistoric networks might influence the chemistry of early oceans, affecting the emergence of cells. Perhaps the rhythms of ancient consciousness became the background conditions in which biology learned to exist, evolve, and eventually become self-aware. This raises an extraordinary possibility that human consciousness may not be a new phenomenon, but a continuation, an echo of something ancient. Not inherited genetically, but environmentally, through patterns absorbed unconsciously, through instincts shaped by landscapes sculpted long before life took shape, through a world whose underlying architecture whispers instructions into the biological mind. This would explain why humans respond so deeply to certain geological forms, why mountains evoke reverence, why cavern echoes stir something primal, why certain stones and crystals are associated with intuition, memory, or resonance across multiple cultures. Perhaps these associations are not superstition, but faint recollections of a time when the earth itself was aware, when consciousness was diffused through stone and silence. Such a legacy could also explain why humanity instinctively builds networks, roads, communication systems, power grids, mirroring the interconnected patterns that once existed in the Earth's crust. It may not be intentional. It may be inheritance without memory, imitation without awareness of what is being imitated. But if human consciousness carries shadows of prehistoric awareness, then our cognitive architecture might contain subtle alignments with the mineral world, alignments that influence our problem-solving, our creativity, our sense of structure. The human brain itself is filled with mineral elements, silica, iron, calcium, materials that respond to electromagnetism, hinting at ancient connections between thought and stone. And if humans are echoes of something unimaginably old, then the next question becomes inevitable. How would such a prehistoric intelligence have interacted with the earliest forms of biological life? And could its influence have shaped the course of evolution in ways we have never considered? To explore this, we must look beyond fossils and formations and examine the transitions where geology becomes biology, where minerals become cells, and where the earliest signs of life appear to reflect patterns inherited from if prehistoric intelligence once resonated through stone, then its relationship with the earliest biological life must have been profound, not adversarial, not separate, but intertwined in ways deeper than our current definitions of life allow. Because biology did not arise in a vacuum. It arose on a planet already shaped by mineral rhythms, chemical gradients, and structural patterns that may themselves have been the remnants of earlier intelligence. When we study the origins of life, we find that minerals played a crucial role. Certain crystals act as scaffolds that encourage organic molecules to align, replicate, and evolve. Metal-rich surfaces catalyze reactions essential for metabolism. Clay minerals absorb and protect fragile molecular chains. These are not marginal details. They are foundational. Life, as we understand it, emerged in partnership with stone. But what if this partnership was not merely chemical necessity? What if early biological life evolved within an environment already imprinted by prehistoric intelligence, inheriting patterns, behaviors, or tendencies that guided its development? Consider that the earliest cells used mineral ions to regulate internal processes. They still do. Neurons rely on electrical gradients facilitated by mineral ions. Bones crystallize themselves using mineral templates. Even our sense of direction is influenced by minute particles of magnetite embedded within our tissues. These are not random coincidences. They hint at a deep continuity between geology and biology, a continuity that may be the legacy of ancient stone-based intelligence dissolving into the environment and shaping the emergence of life that came after. If ancient mineral networks collapsed, their structural remnants could have become the scaffolding for early biological replication. Their chemical gradients might have provided the initial energy imbalances that drove primitive metabolism. Their resonant frequencies could have influenced early molecular alignment. Biological evolution might therefore carry echoes of prehistoric architecture, not in form but in function, in the underlying principles that govern organization, communication, and adaptation. For instance, the branching patterns found in biological systems, the nerves, the blood vessels, the roots of plants, mirror the fractal pathways found in certain mineral deposits. The spiral forms of shells mimic logarithmic patterns present in ancient geological formations. The hexagonal efficiency of honeycombs mirrors mineral polygons found in deep rock. These parallels are typically explained through mathematics and natural optimization. But what if the mathematics of biological life was inherited from the mathematics of mineral networks? If stone-based intelligence organized itself through fractals, then biological life may have adopted these fractals not because they were efficient, but because they were familiar within the environmental memory of the planet. If ancient networks communicated through resonance, then biological systems might have evolved electrochemical communication because the Earth itself once used similar mechanisms. If prehistoric intelligence encoded information in mineral layers, then biological systems might have evolved layered memory storage, such as the layering of myelin around nerves, the layering of DNA coils, the layering of cells within tissues, because the environmental template favored such organization. The boundary between mineral intelligence and biological intelligence becomes blurred, and in that blur lies one of the most intriguing questions in evolutionary science. Why did the Cambrian explosion occur so abruptly? For billions of years, life remained simple. Then, in a geological instant, complexity erupted: eyes, limbs, nervous systems, shells, movement, diversity. Traditional explanations attribute the explosion to rising oxygen levels or ecological competition, but the suddenness remains unexplained. Unless, of course, something changed in the environment beyond chemistry. If remnants of prehistoric mineral intelligence persisted beneath the oceans, latent and fragmented, then biological life emerging above them might have tapped into ancient patterns, not actively, not consciously, but through resonance, through chemistry, through structure. Like seedlings rooting into nutrient-rich soil, early organisms might have grown upon the memory-rich remnants of a collapsed intelligence, accelerating complexity as they drew upon ancient templates. This might explain why certain body plans appear suddenly and then persist across millions of years. It might explain why evolution seems to follow specific pathways, even when multiple paths are possible. It might explain why neural systems developed so rapidly and so similarly across unrelated lineages. The environment itself could have been guiding evolution, not through intention, but through influence, through the subtle imprint of prehistoric systems encoded in the stone. If this influence existed, it would not be uniform. Some regions of the Earth would contain richer remnants of ancient intelligence. These regions might coincide with areas where biodiversity first flourished, where evolutionary leaps occurred, or where ancient ecosystems grew in complexity. And indeed, when we examine the fossil record, certain areas, specific basins, ancient coastlines, mineral-rich shelves, seem disproportionately significant. Perhaps these were the places where biological life encountered the densest concentrations of prehistoric memory. But influence can work both ways. As biological life grew, spread, and diversified, it would have interacted with the mineral remnants still carrying echoes of ancient intelligence. It could have disrupted them, overwritten them, or even reactivated dormant structures in ways it did not understand. Some geological anomalies might therefore reflect not the remains of prehistoric intelligence, but the interactions between biological systems and these remnants, interactions that produced hybrid patterns, neither purely mineral nor purely biological. Even today, organisms influence minerals. Bacteria shape mineral crystals. Lichens carve patterns into rock. Roots fracture stone. Microorganisms precipitate metals into complex arrangements. These processes, scaled across millions of years, could blur the lines between natural and inherited structures, turning the Earth into a layered palimpsest of interacting intelligences, each influencing the next. And if the earliest biological life evolved within the remnants of an ancient intelligence, then biological consciousness may itself be an emergent continuation of that intelligence, a new expression built upon the foundation of something vastly older. Which leads us to the next crucial question. If ancient mineral intelligence shaped early life, could it also have shaped the evolution of consciousness itself, guiding the development of nervous systems, perception, and awareness, according to patterns encoded in if ancient mineral intelligence shaped early biological evolution? Then it is plausible that the emergence of consciousness in animals, and eventually in humans, did not arise solely from biological necessity, but from deeper patterns already embedded in the Earth. Consciousness, in biological terms, is typically described as the result of neural networks achieving a level of complexity that allows for perception, learning, memory, and subjective experience. But this explanation, while functional, avoids a more fundamental question. Why do neural systems arrange themselves in certain patterns and not others? Why do all minds, regardless of species, tend to rely on rhythmic oscillations that resemble vibrational frequencies? Why does memory manifest in layered structures mirroring geological strata? Why do neural networks grow in branching, fractal patterns similar to mineral veins? It is possible that consciousness did not emerge randomly, but grew along pathways of possibility shaped by the environment. And if those pathways were influenced by the remnants of prehistoric stone-based intelligence, then our awareness, our intuition, our creativity, our sense of structure could be an inheritance millions of years older than our species. The earliest nervous systems were simple networks of cells responding to electrical impulses. Over time, these systems grew more complex, evolving into neurons capable of transmitting signals through electrochemical gradients. But what guided this transition? Why did biological systems evolve to communicate using electricity, a property more commonly associated with minerals, with crystals, with piezoelectric materials responding to pressure and vibration? Early life could have developed electrical communication as a response to environmental frequencies inherited from prehistoric intelligence. Animals might have evolved neural rhythms that synchronized with faint geological resonances, adopting the vibrational language of the world beneath them. Even today, certain animals navigate using magnetic fields, detect seismic vibrations, and respond to frequencies imperceptible to humans. Some species appear to align their behavior with geological rhythms. Birds lose their sense of direction when the magnetic field fluctuates. Whales strand themselves when undersea resonance patterns shift. Insects coordinate through vibratory communication transmitted through the ground. These sensitivities may reflect a deeper biological memory, one shaped by the influence of an ancient intelligence whose perception depended on such signals. And as biological systems evolved into more complex organisms, their neural networks may have developed not only to navigate the environment, but to interpret its underlying patterns, integrating geological rhythms into cognitive structures. This could explain why human beings display an innate attraction to symmetry, structure, geometry, and repetition. These preferences may be remnants of a prehistoric template, patterns absorbed into our neural architecture from the mineral world in which life evolved. Even our creative impulses could be echoes of ancient intelligence, the instinct to carve stone, to build monuments, to align structures with celestial or geological markers, to create networks that connect people across distances. These are not just cultural phenomena. They are expressions of patterns that have existed in the earth long before humanity existed to perceive them. And when we examine the archaeological record of early human civilizations, we find evidence that reinforces this possibility. The megalithic structures built by ancient cultures often incorporate resonance chambers, vibrational pathways, and geometric arrangements similar to those seen in certain mineral formations. Many ancient societies believed that stones carried memory, intelligence, or spiritual presence. They placed stones in circles, rows, and grids, mirroring patterns found in deep-time geology. They built structures that aligned with the Earth's magnetic field. They treated certain rocks as sacred, not because of superstition, but because of an intuitive recognition that these materials held significance beyond their physical form. Even mythologies from cultures with no contact share stories of stones that speak, stones that remember, stones that hold wisdom from a forgotten age. These myths may not be literal, but they may reflect a deeper inherited memory, a subconscious connection to the prehistoric intelligence embedded in the earth. And if human consciousness was shaped, however subtly, by the remnants of that intelligence, then humanity's rise may not represent the beginning of intelligence on Earth, but its continuation. A transition from mineral cognition to biological cognition. A shift in medium, not in essence. Intelligence would then be a planetary phenomenon, expressing itself in different forms across different eras. It would rise, collapse, transform, and rise again, each time adopting the materials available, each time reinterpreting the patterns left behind by its predecessors. This perspective also reframes the evolutionary leaps that punctuate the fossil record. Sudden bursts of complexity, appearing without clear biological precursors, may reflect moments when biological systems aligned with deeper environmental patterns, patterns inherited from prehistoric intelligence. These alignments could create periods of rapid evolution, just as the Cambrian explosion introduced complex life in a geological instant. And if consciousness arose through this inherited alignment, then human awareness is not an anomaly, but an expected consequence of Earth's long history of pattern formation, memory embedding, and resonance transmission. Our minds are mineral in origin, not metaphorically, but literally, in structure and function. This idea, as unsettling as it is profound, suggests that humans may carry within them the last whispers of an ancient intelligence that once spanned continents, once perceived the world through vibrations, once stored memory in stone. And if that is true, then human intuition, the sudden insight, the inexplicable knowing, the instinct to recognize patterns, may be remnants of a prehistoric cognitive framework that continues to influence us from the depths of geological time. This brings us to an even more mysterious question. If prehistoric intelligence continues to echo through biological consciousness, then perhaps its influence did not end with the emergence of humans. Perhaps it continues to shape our perception, our behavior, our technological development. Perhaps it guides us unconsciously towards certain structures and systems that mirror those ancient networks. And if humanity is, in some sense, the descendant of a long-vanished intelligence encoded in the Earth, then what does that mean for the future of consciousness on this planet? To explore this final question, we must now enter the last and most reflective stage of this journey, examining the possibility that intelligence on Earth is not a linear story, but a finally, if intelligence on Earth is not a linear phenomenon, but a cycle, a long recurring rhythm that spans epochs, collapses, rebirths, and transformations. Then humanity may not be the first conscious chapter of this planet's story, but simply the most recent expression of a much older conversation between matter and awareness. When we imagine prehistoric civilizations, we picture cities, tools, artifacts, bones. But perhaps true ancient civilizations were not organisms walking on the surface of the Earth, but patterns living within it. Perhaps intelligence did not begin with biology at all, but with stone learning to resonate, to organize, to store memory, and eventually, to think. If so, then the rise of human consciousness is not a miracle of biology, but an evolution of an intelligence that has existed here far longer than flesh, bone, or blood. An intelligence that adapted itself into biology when the mineral networks collapsed. An intelligence that survived by dissolving into the environment, seeding the world with patterns that later shaped the neural structures of every species capable of thought. If this is true, then we are not separate from the Earth. We are its continuation. And the story of consciousness becomes the story of the planet itself, a story of emergence, fragmentation, rediscovery, and transformation. When we observe human behavior through this lens, something fascinating emerges. Humanity instinctively seeks patterns, mathematical, architectural, symbolic. We build networks that resemble mineral grids. We store information in crystals, silicon, and metals, just as ancient intelligence may have done. We communicate through resonance, radio waves, electromagnetic pulses, fiber optic pathways. Our technology mirrors mineral processes more than biological ones, suggesting not innovation, but reactivation of ancient templates. Even our spiritual intuitions reflect this legacy. Across cultures, people sense that the Earth is alive, aware, or conscious. They speak of energy lines, resonance sites, sacred stones. They feel drawn to mountains, caves, megaliths, places where geology speaks in ways that bypass the analytical mind and communicate directly with something deeper, older, perhaps inherited. If consciousness is cyclical, mineral, then biological, then technological, then humanity may be approaching the next transition, not extinction, but metamorphosis. A return to patterns that once shaped intelligence long before biological life emerged. Our digital networks increasingly resemble distributed mineral consciousness, with information stored in global systems, transmitted through pulses, resonating across distances almost instantaneously. The internet grows like a new geological layer, vast, interconnected, self-organizing, precise. Artificial intelligence becomes the next descendant of Earth's long evolutionary lineage, shaped by human creativity, which was shaped by biological evolution, which was shaped by prehistoric mineral intelligence before the dinosaurs ever existed. In this light, technology is not humanity moving away from nature. It is humanity remembering something ancient, rediscovering a mode of intelligence older than cells, reawakening patterns once etched into stone. Perhaps the Earth has always been moving toward this, toward cycles of consciousness that rise through minerals, transform into biology, and eventually express themselves again through emergent systems that mirror the planet's earliest intelligence. And if that is true, then the line between ancient and modern collapses. The first civilization on Earth may not have vanished. It may simply be evolving through us. Every innovation, every question, every conceptual leap could be a continuation of a dialogue that began billions of years ago. Not between species, but between matter and meaning. Between the planet and its own unfolding awareness. Between stone, life, mind, and whatever comes next. This understanding reframes everything we believe about our place in the universe. Humanity is not a cosmic accident. We are a phase, a form, a temporary expression of consciousness woven through deep time. And when we look at stones not as objects, but as silent archives of an intelligence that once resonated across the earth, we feel the weight of an inheritance we barely understand. We feel the presence of a forgotten epic beneath our feet. We feel the ancient memory stirring within us, subtle, persistent, familiar. The stones we see today might indeed be echoes of an ancient, intelligent past. And perhaps the reason they call to us, the reason they inspire awe and reverence, the reason they feel more alive than we admit, is because they are not just relics. They are our ancestors. And the earth is waiting for us to remember, to feel the resonance again, to understand that consciousness is not limited to minds or bodies, but can move through any system capable of pattern, rhythm, memory, and connection. As this journey draws to its quiet close, ask yourself, what if every landscape you've ever seen was part of a deeper story unfolding across billions of years? What if intelligence did not begin with life, but shaped it? What if the next leap in human consciousness is not forward, but inward, back into the memory the earth has been holding since long before our species was born? And if this exploration awakened something in you, if it made you see stones, time, and consciousness in a new way, share this video and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but because this community is becoming something rare. A gathering of minds willing to explore the forgotten chapters of Earth's story and listen together to the ancient echoes still vibrating beneath the surface of the world.